The Baltimore Ravens defense could look a lot different in 2024 because they have a laundry list of defensive free agents, but just how different could it actually look? We talk about that and so much more coming up next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens. We are your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, and I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day, and thanks so much for being here today and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, audio form wherever you get your shows. You can hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. We're 5 days a week here on Locked On Ravens, bringing a daily content, even in the offseason after the season officially ends. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. We're here on a Thursday edition episode of the show, a Taco Thursday. We have a Taco Thursday guest now. Qadry Ismail, former Baltimore Ravens wide receiver, Super Bowl champion, usually is our Friday guest, but we decide to switch some things up sometimes here on Locked On Ravens, and so we're moving Q to one of the taco days on Taco Thursday, and we're going to be still going all off season talking Ravens football. That includes free agency, in the draft, and Q, I think if you're this Ravens team, and if you're any team in the NFL, it's the Chiefs league until it's not now, because they're back-to-back Super Bowl champions. Obviously, you have Mahomes being a 3-time champ, and that's how it was with Kansas City and everything going on there. Speaking of Kansas City, I want to give condolences to the unfortunate events that happened at the Kansas City parade, where, again, senseless gun violence in this country, again, is something that has been an issue for a long time, and it reared its ugly head again at the parade. So my condolences to all the victims and anybody who was injured in that event there. But with this whole thing, Q, I think with Baltimore in particular, they were so close and they felt like it was their year, and it ended up, just not being it. And now I think you have to look in the mirror for Baltimore, because you've already lost a bunch of coaches. Keith Williams actually interviewed for the wide receiver coach position with the Saints today, or I guess yesterday. So that's another thing to monitor. They could lose another guy, but even the free agents, the list of free agents is one we have to monitor, because there is a long list of them.
There is that long list. I think first and foremost, when you look at this crazy world of sports, people get passionate, and I don't know the full story, but yes, my thoughts and prayers are out to all the victims, and just what a horrific way to end, the NFL season as a whole. I mean, we as an NFL community definitely feel that tragedy that went on in Kansas City. And yes, to push through this, it is a situation where, from a free agency standpoint and a coaching standpoint, the larger picture is that you're a very good football team, and the Baltimore Ravens were amazing. And so when you look at other teams and their situation as far as their free agents and who are their starters, this is a team where they're going to look to. And then you look at it from a coaching staff standpoint, and trying to fill out the staff and get your mind into a position where you feel like, hey, we're going to go out and win games. You go to teams like the Baltimore Ravens, because clearly every time you hear someone talk about the Ravens, you talk about culture, you talk about front office, you talk about how they treat one another and the genuineness of it all. So you want that attitude, that mindset to spill over into your staff, your team. And so this is another, off season where, yes, change is inevitable. And that's why, I think that's why it stings more. I know Kyle Van Noy, he was on a couple of shows during the Super Bowl, and he's like, man, I was, just sitting there kind of contemplating everything for a whole week in my house, like just sitting there humdrum, because of it was such a unique situation. You really felt connected to one another, and The energy was right, and it was a scenario where he also knows that. Yeah, I mean, he's a prime example. He was a couch free agent, came in, played extremely well, but now the business side of football, it just changes everything, and I think that's one thing we're seeing.
Right. And again, if the Ravens had won and all this change happened, it'd be okay. Well, yes, I mean, they got it done. It was a great team, but we knew it wasn't going to be this way and they weren't going to be able to retain everybody. But the fact that they didn't get it done, I mean, I agree, Q, it makes this thing a little bit more, especially on the defensive side of the ball where they've already lost Mike McDonald and Denard Wilson, Anthony Weaver, right? A bunch of really quality coaches. But then you just look at the free agent list defensively. From a player perspective, you got Justin Madubuike and Patrick Queen and Geno Stone and Van Noyes. You talked about Jadeveon Clowney, Arthur Millette, Ronald Darby. The list continues to go on and on and on there. The defense still has players like Kyle Hamilton and Roquan Smith and Marlon Humphrey and other quality guys as well. But the question that people have been asking, well, how different is this defense going to look next year? One, under a new coordinator in Zach Orr, but two, depending on who stays and who doesn't. I'm not saying Baltimore is going to drop and be the worst defense in the league next year, but it's just going to be a different experience, I would say, because some of these guys aren't going to come back, and we already know the coaching staff is going to look a lot different as well.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like you kind of have to anticipate that. If you're Eric DeCosta, you got to anticipate. What are the core players that I feel I can build a team around. And, with free agency, with salary cap, with a franchise quarterback that, takes up a good portion of the cap, and rightly so. He deserves every penny of it. You got to kind of start, figuring out how to weave and put things into perspective. I mean, this is a team that is technically up against the cap and have very little, cap space. So you got to figure out, how is that going to look for you, when it comes to free agents, renegotiating contracts, letting guys go as far as, the June date. So the salary cap hit isn't as big. And so all of it comes into negotiation play, and that's what you get paid if you're Eric Costa and trying to figure out how to, grow off of this team. I thought the end of the year when he said, it's not about rebuilding. We don't want to rebuild. We recognize that it's a consistent thing. It's a consistent process. It's a consistent retooling. How do we retool? And I think that's going to be the big elephant in the room for him is how do they retool. And defensively, yeah, you're going to have a whole different personality in Zach Orr. Mike McDonald's not coming back through that door unless he is NFC West and the AFC North are going to be playing one another. And that's just the way it is. And, okay, we saw what happened when Wink Martindale left. We saw what happened when Mike McDonald came in. And we saw how that just kind of took off and did what it did. And now here comes Zach Orr, who now is going to have his chance to be that guy that, has the charge over a defense that historically in Baltimore is a top tier, hit you in the face, hold each other accountable, run to the football style of play.
And that identity is not going to change regardless of who goes and leaves Baltimore, who comes back to Baltimore. There have been a countless amount of players and good players who have left Baltimore, and they're still known as a defensive team. Now, Lamar Jackson's come in, and I think you kind of push that towards offense a little bit. But when you think Baltimore Ravens, I think the first thing you always think about is defense in the Ray Lewis-led teams. And obviously that 2000s defense that you were a part of and everything with the defensive side of the ball. But again, I like the phrase retooling over rebuilding because the Ravens aren't rebuilding. And they're a team that's going to be in the thick of the AFC playoff hunt next season unless something crazy happens. I'm not saying it's impossible, but again, something crazy would have to happen. But you're going to have a different look. And whether that is Patrick Queen leaving, whether that is Geno Stone leaving, if somehow Justin Madubuike walks out that door, which we'll get to, should not happen. But it's going to look different. And whether that's a guy like Travis Jones stepping up into a bigger role or Trenton Simpson, who they drafted, they have the stars in place. They're going to lose a couple guys, but this isn't the end of the world. Just because the Ravens didn't win this year or this past year does not mean it's the end of the world. And coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk a little bit more about specific free agents, who could stay, who could go, and who should be a priority for the Ravens to re-sign, both defensively and some offensive football talk as well. Stay tuned. A lot to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. And this next segment is brought to us by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest, big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased in your life. So today I want to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking the same thing this week. And for me, I mean, we can talk about the AFC Championship game and how, I really, really think the Ravens should have ran the ball and their game plan was not good. I am trying to move on from that, though. So I'm going to say that I really feel like the Ravens need to re-sign Justin Madubuike. We've talked about it a lot on the show, and I just feel like he is so important to their defensive success, and it's so hard to find interior pass rush. If you're the Ravens, you absolutely have to bring a guy like that back to your team. And for a lot of people, therapy can be different, right? Different for everybody. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team. It's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We're back on the second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Qadry Ismail and Q. I think when everybody looks at that free agent list, the first player you look at and you circle is Justin Madubuike, is the guy who should be the most important and should be the biggest priority for the Ravens. Interior pass rush nowadays is just so hard to find. And look, get all the credit in the world to Justin Madubuike. He picked the right time to have his best year in a contract year. And now he's going to get paid. He's going to get paid a ton of money. Now, there is an option for them to franchise tag Justin, and they have until July to work out an extension in that regard. That franchise tag number is $20.9 million. I think Justin cleared probably $25 million when it comes to his actual play on the field. But is there anybody that you're ranking ahead of Justin Madubuike in terms of who has to be a priority for the Ravens to re-sign this offseason?
No, Patrick Queen would be the only other guy that I would say, is deserving of the conversation, a strong conversation. I think it'd be foolish for the Ravens not to have that conversation, unless Eric Costa is just like, throwing his hands up in the air like, we drafted him, but oh well. And it was interesting because CJ Mosley was on another podcast, and he was being interviewed, and part of his interview process, he was even kind of talking about like he wished he would have had more conversation with Ozzie, and it just didn't materialize. I think it is interesting, how did Patrick and his representation kind of have conversations with Eric if they did during the year. Those are details that we're probably not going to know about, and so be it, unless it's years later and he wants to talk about it. But I think overall, Justin Madubuike has earned the right to be that guy that everyone wants to talk about. I think Zeitler, he's another guy offensively that is being spoken of, but defensively, he's top dog, and rightly so.
And to me, I think that the Ravens they're set defensively on the defensive line for at least next season if they can bring back Madubuike. You have Madubuike, Broderick Washington, Michael Pierce, Travis Jones. That group it's a really, really solid group. But then you look at some of the other ones. You mentioned Patrick Queen there. It's just such an interesting conversation because obviously he has earned every penny of whatever deal he's going to get, whether it's in Baltimore or somewhere else. But the Ravens paid Roquan Smith $100 million just over a year ago. And the way that the defenses are kind of evolving, Q, is you don't always have to have two inside linebackers on the field. Now with Roquan and Patrick Queen, they were both good enough where you wanted them on the field together almost anytime you could get them. But the conversation is, well, can you justify, with Roquan already being under contract, paying Patrick Queen whatever that dollar amount is going to be, $65 million, $75, $85, even another $100 million contract? Is there any way, and we'll talk about it throughout the offseason, but just an initial conversation, is there any way you feel like Patrick Queen is back in Baltimore, or do you think, a team's going to offer him too much, and there's just not a way for him to actually get back in a Ravens uniform here?
I don't see it happening. I think he played that well. He dominated, unless he is somehow going to do a, Tom Brady team discount type deal, which, even looking on that was asinine. Sure, legacy wise is one thing, but you're a linebacker, you're not a quarterback. And I just think ultimately, there are a lot of guys that are out there that are going to be trying to, break the bank and get a big deal. But teams that are under the salary cap, well under the salary cap, they're going to feel real comfortable with saying, well, yeah, that's great that you are doing what you're doing as far as asking. But Patrick Queen, he's actually proven it. And so teams that need to upgrade their defense and have salary cap space, they're going to be looking at Patrick Queen, and they're going to be saying, you know what? Again, we need to look at guys that can make an impact. He's that impact player. Let's make a play for him.
And a follow-up to that one is it feels like the Ravens had almost kind of prepared for this possibility, one, declining the fifth-year option, and two, drafting Trenton Simpson in the third round. Obviously, we saw Trenton in that Week 18 game against Pittsburgh when not a lot of the starters played, and he was balling out, flying around the field and kind of giving us that glimpse. How confident are you that Trenton, obviously there's going to be some growth that has to happen for him to be the level that PQ is, but how confident are you that he can step in next to Roquan if Patrick Queen doesn't come back and be that option?
Well, Roquan is Agent Zero. A high tide raises all ships. I think he really elevated the level of play of Patrick Queen, and they became this dynamic, amazing duo. Trenton Simpson has the opportunity to have sat back and learned from PQ, and PQ obviously was saying how, hey man, he's asked a ton of questions. I was more than happy to talk to him about it and give him insight and understanding, which is called being a pro, a pro's pro. And so now it's up to Trenton. Like, what are you going to do in the off season? He's in those meetings where his now defensive coordinator was, his coach. So you already got a familiarity and a comfort level of just, all right, this is how his mindset is. This is how he's thinking. All right, let's go. Let's see what you got. In other words, you got support around you, and it's up to you to take advantage of it to do what you do.
And I think this is why the Ravens, again, Trenton Simpson, athletic guy, sideline to sideline speed. The traits are there. And again, it will take some sort of a learning curve, but I do think with Roquan being there and being that master elevator, as you said, Q, maybe not as big of a curve as it could have been if there was somebody else next to him. But then you look at the other defensive players. It's Geno Stone, and it's Jadeveon Clowney, and Kyle Van Noy, and Ronald Darby, Arthur Millette. They have some other guys who they got on bargain deals, and obviously they outperformed those deals and are slated to get pretty big paydays this offseason. I think Geno Stone it's not the exact same conversation as Patrick Queen, but he played really well, and he is not technically a starter when the Ravens are healthy because they have Marcus Williams and they have Kyle Hamilton. So does Geno Stone find a starting role where they also pay him pretty handsomely? Is that enough for him to lead Baltimore? With Clowney and Van Noy, they just had almost career years essentially in Baltimore, rejuvenation years, and is a team going to pay him? And then for Millette and Darby is kind of the same thing. Both of those guys had rejuvenation years. How do you see the Ravens maneuvering the rest of those guys? Because to me, I think Stone is unlikely to come back. I think maybe they bring back one or two, maybe both, but one at least. And then I think to me, maybe one of those corners.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Geno went to, say, Seattle. I wouldn't be surprised if Darby and Millette were re-signed because you can never have enough corners. The Rock Ya-Sin experiment, unless they just trying to kick the tires, but I don't know. I just think that was kind of a waste. I'm not really sure what went wrong as far as just the overall. I know there were some injuries, but even without that, he just never really climbed the chart. But yeah, no, I think they're going to get some fair offers. But at the same time, yeah, they could possibly, because all teams are looking for veteran corners. And so, yeah, they could play the leverage game. Again, it all comes down to the salary cap and how do you maneuver to get, more room under the salary cap. That's going to be the biggest issue that I think that, Eric DeCosta is going to have to face when it comes to these negotiations.
And a little side detour, because you make a good point, Q, about, look, there are going to be plenty of ways the Ravens can clear up space here, whether it's cutting guys, restructures, post-June 1 cuts. You kind of mentioned that a little earlier. But Ronnie Stanley's the big name. With a post-June 1 cut, you save $15 million, but obviously you have to wait to use those funds a little bit. But then you have the other guys who might not necessarily free up that big of a chunk of change, but would still give you some money. Now, Tyus Bowser, I don't know what in the world his situation is. I mean,
Yeah.
If you know anything, Q, I'd be glad to hear it, but I don't think anybody knows what's going on with Tyus Bowser right now. And even with everything going on with him and how good he was and how big of a steal that deal was, I mean, he's not playing, and I don't know if he's going to play. So obviously he's a candidate to get cut. That would save them some money. But then it's the other stuff too, right? Morgan Moses would free up a couple $1 million off of his deal. Patrick Ricard, that would free up a couple $1 million. With Bowser, Ricard, and Moses, Q, we'll throw Stanley aside for now. With those three, do you think all three come back? Do you think one goes and two stay, or do you think all of them are just out the door?
Yeah, I think Patrick Ricard and Moses, again, it's just leverage, and they don't have as much leverage. I think with Ronnie Stanley, because of his cap hit, he has a lot of leverage, but he doesn't in that, obviously the injury and his play kind of like, are we going to just, do away with him, or are we going to try our best to figure it out and salvage it? You've got a franchise quarterback. When Ronnie is healthy, dude is phenomenal, one of the best in business. Moses, is it a draft situation? Right tackle is easier to kind of replace. I know they were talking about his shoulder and whether or not, he's going to elect to have surgery or not. I mean, those are, issues that he has to kind of deal with and figure out. But again, like offensive line and offensively, as far as even Patrick Ricard and the value he brings to the table, I mean, that's a hefty one, because last I checked, you got a franchise quarterback and you want to protect him and give him some continuity on that O-line.
Yeah, and we're looking at potentially, if you're the Ravens, Linderbaum is there, that, but Kevin Zeitler's a free agent. I know there have been some rumblings that he's negotiating with the team right now, but nothing official at the time of this recording. You have Moses and Stanley under contract, but who knows what their status is going to be. And then John Simpson's also a free agent. So right now, only one of your offensive linemen is 100% a sure thing, and that is Patrick Ricard. Some continuity on the offensive line. I think Baltimore fans, the team itself, they've been looking for that for a while here. So we're going to see how it plays out. But coming up in the final part of the show, we'll continue talking about some free agents, move more to the offensive side of the ball, where Kevin Zeitler is, in fact, a part of that group. Plus, we'll get into a couple of trade discussions as well, and if the Ravens can even afford a trade at this point. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, this episode is brought to you by Game Time. And there have been plenty of times when I've had a frustrating ticket buying experience. Sometimes I wasn't sure if the seats were any good. Sometimes I couldn't find last-minute tickets. And other times there are just no good deals at all. You shouldn't even have to worry, though, when you're buying tickets to your next big event, because Game Time is a fast and easy way to get tickets for all the sports, music, hobby, and theater events near you. With critical last-minute deals, all in prices used from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time makes the guesswork out of buying tickets And obviously no playoff games for the Ravens anymore. So that's out of the equation. But there are plenty of concerts in the Baltimore area that you could be looking at Game Time for your tickets. And the Game Time app is great. They have views from all the seats in the venue, and Game Time's only thinking app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps, and they're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets with zone deals. Pick the session to Game Time, pick seats for big time savings. Same thing as we're going to buy tickets with Game Time. Down the Game Time, create an account, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off first purchase. Terms apply again. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time to the estimate of lowest price guarantee. We're back rounding out Locked On Ravens with Qadry Ismail. I am Kevin Oestreicher coming to you on a Thursday edition of the show. Be sure to subscribe and follow along, both audio form and video, same show, both audio and videos. We're talking off season here. Ravens, no team, in fact, is playing football. Is the Kansas City Chiefs are the Super Bowl champions. And Q, now it's up to Baltimore to revamp this roster. You mentioned that word, retool, to be able to go out there and try to dethrone Kansas City. But offensively, Kevin Zeitler is a big name to watch. And I think, if anything, that should be a guy you prioritize. But the Odell Beckham conversation is one that I think is also interesting because he had a great veteran presence on the team. But in terms of actual stats, just pure base stats, it wasn't up to the expectations. Now, Odell put context out on Twitter. He made sure his context was heard on Twitter. And I don't think it was as bad of a signing from an on-field perspective as the stats make it out to be. But again, he's not going to get a contract from Baltimore that's what he got last year. He's not going to get that up to $18 million with 15 guaranteed. Would you be willing to bring back Odell, Q, if it's maybe a cheaper deal, a 1 year, $7 or $8 million deal, and he's able to, again, play a veteran role, but not have $15 million worth of expectations on him?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, Steve Bisciotti was the one who wanted to make that thing happen, and that's where, the leverage game was clearly in Odell's camp, and obviously the leverage of signing him, it worked itself out. I think at the same time, when you look at, Odell and what he was on the field, no question about it, he was clearing away a strong leader for that locker room. But there are these guys, and they call them rookies, and they're young, or there are other young free agents that can come about. So as of now, sure, I'd love to see him come back. I don't even know if, 7 or 8 million is low enough for him. More like a 3 to 5 range, and loaded up with some major incentives, because that sounds more realistic. But again, you got to weigh in and see what, who else is out there, and who do you feel is going to draft. I think he'd be a guy where you'd wait till well after the draft and kind of like sift through some things. But his point that he made on Twitter, as far as like, his effectiveness was good. It was valid. And I know that Rashad Bateman doesn't play as well. I believe Zay Flowers, he doesn't play as well. There's this swagger that room had because of Odell Beckham Jr.
Yeah, I agree. Odell, I think they've been looking for a wide receiver for a while to just give them that pure veteran presence. Not that they haven't had him in the past, obviously, but, in the Lamar Jackson era I'm talking about, where, you're just looking for a guy like that. And obviously Odell, he brings name value, right? He's a international superstar in every sense of the word, and we know what his peak was. But obviously, and I said this, Q, you said it too, to expect prime New York Giants Odell Beckham at this point in his career, it was never going to happen. But I think with the contract he got, it was okay. Well, you're paying him all that money. It's $15 million with 18 guaranteed. Well, now he has to go out there and have 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns, when, again, it wasn't going to happen. So I think Odell coming back on a cheaper contract, 1 year deal, I'm fine with that, because I think he added a boost and a spark, not only to the wide receivers like you talked about, I think to the whole team, to the whole room. I mean, Lamar had said, bring me Odell, bring me DeAndre Hopkins, and they went out there and they got him Odell. So maybe this time they go get him DeAndre, which I know you love talking about DeAndre Hopkins year round, Q. That's your favorite topic of conversation. But it is interesting because the other position, talk about veterans and maybe guys who had a peak but aren't necessarily there anymore. Let's talk running back and a guy like Derrick Henry, which is an interesting point because you have Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, and Dalvin Cook, all as free agents. Justice Hill's on the last year of his 2-year deal. Obviously, he was great for him. And Keaton Mitchell's going to be back, hopefully, at some point in 2023 with the injury he suffered. But there were all those rumblings at the trade deadline about Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs. Do you feel like with the way the league is going, we know the running back position with most positions, if you compare those two, running back is devalued compared to most positions in the league. But do you think it's worth for Baltimore to go bring in a Derrick Henry or Saquon or Josh Jacobs and spend that money? Or would you rather go back to what the Ravens have had, Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins maybe on a 1-year prove-it deal coming back?
Yeah, I don't know if it would be cool for J.K. to come back. I mean, I think it would be good for him. It'd be good for the team to kind of get like a shake it off, fresh start. I think at the same time when it comes to Keaton Mitchell, his knee progress is going to be one thing, but it's the rigors of getting back up to full speed and being that speed demon that made him so electric. That's going to be something that you're going to have to wait and see. But then, with Derrick Henry, it's the asking price. That's what it's going to come down to. I mean, if the Ravens were $25 million under the cap and just, $17 million under the cap, whatever, you got some options, but they're not. And that's the problem. I think, what are they, $7 million or something like that? $5 million? That's not good. It's a tight situation. So from a running back aspect of things, am I down at the Senior Bowl or am I scouring, for the next Keaton Mitchell and going to these different pro days and saying, hey man, this guy, he's going to be, valid. And we're going to pay him a rookie deal. That's what you're dealing with. I think Gus Edwards, sure. I think it might be a late season situation for Gus, or it is a situation where he too would get offered a deal somewhere and take it. Again, it's not just a one-way street where the Ravens just have at it. It's other teams and trying to fill their needs and looking at what the Ravens did, and what the Ravens did, they were successful. They're successful. I want that guy. I want that coach on my team. I think because of that, they get an opportunity to pillage the Ravens. And that's something that Eric DeCosta, I'm sure, is well aware of.
Yeah, and you make a good point there about it being a two-way street because, look, the Ravens, we talked about it when it happened. Darius Smith agreed to that deal, and the Ravens said, all right, we're going to give you this. You want this? Darius Smith said yes, but then he decided he didn't want it. And then it's the player, right? The player has an option and the team has an option. It's not just the team saying, okay, you're coming with me and you're coming with me and you're coming with me. It's a two-way thing. So I like that you made that point because it is really, really true. But a way that teams can acquire players, not just through free agency, but trades are another way they can do it. Now, the thing with Baltimore and trades right now is I think every pick is so valuable to them. There have been multiple mock trades this offseason that I've already seen, Brian Burns and Alvin Kamara. There are all these, scenarios and the speculation and everything that goes on. You know how it goes. But to me, I think it's so important because now, look, the Kamara deal is for a 7th rounder. If you can trade a 7th rounder for any player that, Pro Bowl or All Pro, I think you take that deal if you can get the cap to work, obviously. But I mean, how important is it for them? Again, it's like what Eric DeCosta did this past offseason where he hit on almost every minimum signing. I think the Rock Yassin one was the only one, and that was about $6 million. But every other signing was great for him. Younger draft picks like Tavius Robinson, who I expected to not really have a role. He played a pretty big role for him because of injuries and everything going on. I just think with trades, you have to, even if, it's your 2nd rounder or your 3rd rounder, you're going to have these rookie contracts and have people producing on these rookie contracts because with Lamar's contract and with some of these other big money contracts going around, it's not like Lamar's on a rookie deal anymore. It's going to kind of change the philosophy of how Baltimore approaches things.
Yeah, you look over at, the Kansas City Chiefs, they just won a Super Bowl, and their cap situation is pretty tight because of Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is going to cost mega money against the cap, but he had a tough year. You're not looking at like just an abundance of talent on the offensive side of the football. I mean, they had to really be strategic with the defense side of the football, and you're hoping that your guy is strong enough to carry you through. Clearly, he was. They got hot right at the right time, and now they're hoisting up the Lombardi. Same thing for Lamar. Like, you got to realize, like, hey, man, this is where we're at. Your cap is your cap. We can't get everyone. The guys that we have, like the Kyle Hamiltons, they're on that rookie deal. Woo! Whew. Relief. But then you got the Justin Madubuikes, who deservedly so, is going to ball out. You got other guys who balled out, but unfortunately got injured in the Ronnie Stanley. So those are the elephants in the room. Those elephants in the room, some good, some not so good. We obviously mentioned the running back situation, but I think ultimately it's a situation where for salary cap, trying to formulate what your team is going to look like, Lamar Jackson is going to have, to shoulder more of the load, even more so than what he already has been doing. And that's just because of, the economics of football.
And we see guys like Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, they elevate the talent around him, right? We've literally seen Lamar do it for the majority of his career. So it's not that Lamar can't do that, but obviously when you're talking about where the Ravens will have to maybe let a guy go that they could have re-signed if Lamar wasn't on the rookie deal. And look, you pay Lamar that contract 10 times out of 10, right? That's just what happens with great quarterbacks. But then the subsequent roster construction, the formula just changes where hitting on fourth-round picks becomes more important. The Ravens have done that plenty in their franchise history. I'm sure they'll do it many more times as it goes on here. But in terms of giving out those 5-year, $70 million contracts like that of Marcus Williams, it's just not as feasible anymore because you're not going to have as much wiggle room with that contract. So I'm not saying they can't sign anybody ever again. They can't hand out a contract like that ever again. But obviously you have players like Justin Madubuike. He's going to get a huge contract. And they gave Roquan. And the Ravens operate more on the sense of we're going to try to re-sign our own guys, and then we'll go outside the organization and get some guys as well. It's a two-way street. You're bringing in guys from outside. You're keeping your own. So plenty of ways to upgrade the team, trades included if they want to go that far. But Q, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for hopping on. And again, this offseason is going to be a crazy one. I know you're going to stay busy yourself doing everything. Tell people where they can find you and everything you got going on this offseason.
Yeah, no, I think the biggest thing from WJZ, we're still talking about football. So you'll see me probably on our Purple show that is typically over the weekend. Then at the same time, you can work-wise, if you're trying to get in some good work, missiletraining.com. You can go over to my website, check out my website, check out what I do, how I can help you out from a fitness standpoint, from an athletic standpoint, from a movement standpoint, all those things. And yeah, was Friday, now Thursday, we're going to be on Locked On Ravens. So check us out. And obviously over on X, I am Qadry Ismail. Check me out on there. We'll be making sure to engage and interact.
If you want your movement squared away, Q is your guy. If you've heard him talk on Locked On Ravens, you know it. If you've seen, obviously, he's a former pro athlete, so you know he's got a bunch of ways and tips and tricks, and obviously got a sweet little setup there, I know, Q, with everything you got going on. So if you want to check out Q's work, again, links will be in the description below. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thanks so much for tuning in. Again, be sure to subscribe, follow along, video form, audio form. We're here for you 5 days a week plus bonus content. You can find me on Twitter at KaosStrecker34, also Instagram as well. I'm trying to start that up again. Same thing at KaosStrecker34. We'll be right back here tomorrow talking more Ravens football. So be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.